Earlier we spoke to Rosie Lewis from The Australian about the key role of the crossbenchers in helping the government get their legislative agenda through. And joining us now is one of those key crossbench senators, Rex Patrick. Rex, thank you for your time. Now, the big discussion...
Good morning.
Still good morning. One of the big discussions this week has been around the Navy with this major, biggest ever maritime conference being held in Australia. I know you were there yesterday. And the Chief of Navy stoked a bit of discussion saying that he thinks that the submarine fleet could end up being nuclear. Do you think that we should be looking at having nuclear submarines in our upcoming fleet as well as diesel?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I'm probably one of the few members of Parliament that's actually been to sea on nuclear-powered submarines on a number of occasions, so I do know the territory pretty well. We need to be careful. Just as you might think that a Ferrari is a really good car, when you try and take one of them off-road or perhaps use it to go shopping with the kids, it turns out it's not an effective tool. And there are, just as there are differences in cars, there are also differences in submarines. So nuclear-powered submarines are great for going down to a couple of hundred metres, putting the foot down on the accelerator and staying at, say, 30 knots for several days and weeks if necessary. So they're great power projection tools. They can carry more weapons and more sensors. They are faster, but they don't perform as well in shallower water. In a number of circumstances, they can be noisier. And we also have to think about the fact that in order to have a nuclear-powered submarine, we would need to have a nuclear industry. There is no country in the world that operates nuclear submarines that doesn't have a nuclear industry. We must also be prepared for the idea that we would have nuclear-powered submarines pulling into our ports, and indeed when maintenance was occurring, sitting on hard stands in either Perth or Adelaide or Sydney, and working out whether people are comfortable with the idea of having a reactor close by, maintained by the Royal Australian Navy.
Would you support the development of a nuclear industry to have some nuclear submarines? I understand your argument there about not having a fleet of Ferraris, but why not have four-wheel drive and a Ferrari as well?
Well, that is an option that some countries use, but the first question needs to be, is Australia prepared to go nuclear? I know that's a discussion that's being sort of talked about now. In my view, from an energy perspective, that's a bit of a distraction because even if we made a decision now to move to a nuclear reactor for power generation purposes, it would be 15 years before we would first see the first electron flowing from such a reactor. So in some sense, that's a distraction from the energy problem of now, which needs to be solved.
But when it comes to submarines, would you support a nuclear reactor being built to support nuclear submarines?
Once again, I think that's quite a complex question you're asking, and it does need examination, so it's not a very simple answer. I'm always open to consideration of these things. It is a complex question that needs to be looked at in detail.
Now, you've been quite upset about the recent development in the development of our submarines, that French senators were briefed, but not Australian senators.
Yeah, look, I've been trying to get access to information about the shipyard configuration for our future submarines. Very concerned that the Navy were going down a pathway whereby they would displace the full cycle dockings for our Collins-class submarines across to WA. Now, that's a proposition that doesn't stack up on the merits, but I was concerned about that. I have been trying to get details from Defence about their plans, and it's been like pulling teeth. Finally got some information last week under FOI, but very disturbed that the information that I was trying to get had in fact been voluntarily given to French senators, and that's no disrespect to my colleagues, but it's my view, my strong view, that for an Australian submarine program, Australian senators and the Australian public deserve to know before French legislators.
Why do you think French legislators were told but not Australians?
Well, I don't understand why. Perhaps the Navy knows that the displacement of full cycle dockings from South Australia to Western Australia is very politically sensitive, and of course that wouldn't be a sensitivity that would exist with French senators. But once again, it's inappropriate for foreign legislators to be briefed on Australian submarine programs or Australian naval programs before Australian senators and the Australian public.
Now, if we turn to, we've got one sitting week of both houses coming up next week in Canberra. You have a very key position within the Senate to help the government pass its legislative agenda or block it. Two of the key issues are the random drug testing trials of welfare recipients and also the expansion of the cashless welfare card. You are leaning towards not supporting those measures. Why is that? Okay,
so let's just deal with both of those separately, and I will preface my statements by saying this is Rebekha Sharkey's area. In the case of the cashless welfare card, she has just recently been to Ceduna. She's heading off to Hinkler very shortly to have a detailed look at this. But one of our concerns at this point in time is that we supported a trial into the cashless welfare card. We supported an extension on the basis that the first time around they mucked up the data collection, they mucked up the analysis. The second time around they have collected data, but that data is now still sitting with the University of Adelaide. We haven't seen a report. So, having supported that trial extension on the basis that we would get some analysis, we really do need to see that analysis before we make a decision. In relation to drug testing, one of our difficulties there is that we're not actually sure what it's intending to achieve. Right now, if you don't complete the obligations you have in respect of either participating in job search activities or being on drug rehab, then you won't get welfare anyway. So the question is, what is this trying to achieve? And I have a strong personal reservation in relation to the idea that you test someone and then just abandon them. We have a situation in this country now where people who want help in relation to drug rehab can't get it. There's no point in testing people and then abandoning them. So there would have to be considerable upgrades in the treatment of people who are addicted to drugs and want to get off them, and we don't know what the cost of that would be. So there's just not enough information flowing around. Once again, it's Rebekha Sharkey's area within our party, and I know she's doing some detailed analysis of all of this.
Absolutely. When it comes to saying that you want to see, though, that detail around the support that would be given to welfare recipients who've tested positive for drugs, what would have you satisfied enough to support the government? Do you want a number figure of how much they're going to give to rehabilitation services?
Well, it comes down to what they will do first and then how much that would cost and understanding what the total cost of that would be. Once again, we're just short of any details as to what the government is planning. Rebekha is in conversation with the government. We're always talking to the government about legislation, but at this point in time, we're not convinced.
And when it comes, we've been talking about what the government wants to get done in the next week. What do you want to get done in the next week in Canberra? What's your number one objective?
Well, I'm actually just really preparing myself for the following week, which is estimates. I mean, clearly there is legislation that we'll have to deal with. I haven't been made aware of what the legislative list is. That normally comes out late on a Thursday. At that point in time, we'll be able to look at what legislation is on the table and what we need to prepare for. In some sense, we are driven by the government during sitting weeks. My favourite time of year is estimates, which follows the week after.
You're not the only senator there. Rex Patrick, thank you for your time.
Thank you.